Warning! Motor should not be running when installing this kit. Disconnect motor from battery or batteries to ensure that it cannot start. Warning! Installation of the included neutral safety interface is required. The interface safeguards the motor's gearbox from accidental damage. Remove motor's cover and place it where it will not interfere with installation. Locate flywheel cover. Remove flywheel cover by pulling it up. Find intake screen. Remove intake screen by pulling up on it. Move intake screen. Find throttle cable release clip. Rotate clip counterclockwise to release. Remove throttle rod from pin on throttle cam. Use screwdriver to pry fitting from ball joint. Unscrew ball fitting from throttle rod. Remove bolt. Mount supplied servo bracket. Using supplied metric 6x40 mm bolt. Trim ribs on servo with knife. Use caution so you don't cut yourself. Servo with ribs removed. Install arm on servo. Arm should sit above servo shaft and can spin freely to allow adjustment in later steps.
Now we've taken the rod end and threaded on to the slip assembly supplied with your iTroll kit. Tighten the first nut down all the way against the second one, then tighten the rod end as far as it'll go. Now we're going to align the rod end with the slip link. So if you can tell, the rod end is just about perpendicular with the long axis of this slip link. You can usually tighten the rod end 1/8 of a turn by using a screwdriver, because what we want is there to be a 45-degree angle between the face of the rod end and the axis. Now if you're more than 1/8 turn off, you have to back it off and then set the nut against the rod end and tighten it with a 3/8 wrench. We're going to install the slip assembly and the push rod. With my left hand, I'm reaching through the intake manifold to hold the throttle rod out. Now I'm slipping the first slip block over the throttle rod, then the push rod, and then the second slip block. Keep a hold of the push rod, pull rod, in case you drop the slip assembly, you'll be catching it with the pull rod. Now snap the ball end fitting over the ball joint, and you've successfully installed the slip assembly. Now take the supplied collar and slip it over the throttle rod. Then the supplied lock nut. It's easiest to do this by putting the lock nut into a deep socket and then basically capping it over the throttle rod so you don't drop it. Now what we're going to do is tighten the nut. We've tightened the nut just until it's touched the spacer. But there's play in the throttle rod. It can be lifted up and down. So what we want to do is tighten the nut just so it touches the spacer with no slop in it. So you can see this little slop in the throttle rod. There's just still a hair of space between the nut and the spacer. That looks pretty good, but there's a test. And what the test is to go to the bottom of the motor and operate where the throttle rod of the motor. We disconnected this earlier on the installation. I want to see if there's just a little bit of play here. It's a little too much, so I'm going to tighten the nut a hair more. I think it's a little bit too tight. I can't see any space between the nut and the spacer. Need about a thickness of a piece of paper gap between the two. There we go. I can feel the play. Do that test one more time. That's perfect. Okay, the next step is to install the servo motor onto the bracket. This is what a modified servo looks like. If you notice, the ribs are gone. I also attached the servo arm outside of the motor and put the fixing screw in about 3 turns. You need to ensure that the servo arm will turn freely. It's not engaging the splines. This ensures you can't drop the fixing screw into the motor. So now you can put the servo on the bracket. Notice it goes behind the metal piece. And then affix each wing with a machine screw and a nylon self-locking nut. We have the servo motor hooked up to the control harness of iTroll, so we can move the servo motor. Then what we need to do is to idle the servo. You can tell on iTroll's screen, it confirms that we're in idle. What this does is it locks the servo at idle position so the shaft can't be moved. Then we're going to index the arm. The proper indexing spot is this surface of the arm is right below this corner of the servo. There's a better look. Now we can tighten the fixing screw at the center of the servo arm. All this has to be a snug. You don't have to crank down on it. Then we can put the push rod into the hole in the center of the servo arm fitting. I'm going to push down here while I thread the push rod into the center, into the hole. Then I'm going to push down on the flat surface of the push rod, but we don't want to open the throttle, so you got to be aware of throttle movement here. If you push down too hard, you can open the throttle, which will raise the idle point of the motor. You just want to get the slack out of the system. Now this surface of the rod should be parallel to the front edge of the servo. Now let's give it a test. Release the iTroll from idle. And there we go. So that completes the installation of the Fit Kit for the 75, 90, and 115 Mercury motors, 2013 and up.
Reattach throttle cable. Secure clip. Snap intake screen into place. Snap flywheel cover into place. At front of motor, release grommet cover by removing 3 bolts at indicated locations. Grommet is split, which makes insertion of servo harness easy. Interior servo harness path. Reattach grommet at front of motor. Please proceed with installation of iTroll electronics package and neutral safety interface.